The map nobody gave you. Why longevity is a code and how to crack it. You already know something is off. Maybe you felt it last year at your annual physical, staring at a set of numbers your doctor delivered with practiced calm that barely concealed the weight they carried. Maybe you felt it one morning when you caught your reflection and didn't quite recognize the person looking back. Maybe you felt it in the space between who you were at 30 and who you are now, in the energy that used to be automatic and now has to be negotiated, in the recovery times that used to be hours and are now days. Or maybe you felt it in something quieter and harder to name. The growing sense that the body you live in is running a program you never consciously chose. If any of this is familiar, you are not imagining it, and you are not helpless. What you are is uninformed. Specifically, uninformed about a body of research that has quietly revolutionized what science understands about human aging over the past 3 decades, and that most people will never encounter because it exists in academic journals and research institutions rather than in the magazines at the checkout line or the advertisements that follow you around the internet. This book is about that research. More precisely, it is about what that research reveals, that aging, as most people experience it, is not an inevitable biological destiny. It is, to a degree that should shock you, a largely self-administered process. And the code that governs it, the layered, learnable system of biological, psychological, and behavioral signals that determines how fast you age and how well you live, is something you can understand, influence, and in many meaningful ways, rewrite. This is not a book about cheating death. It is a book about understanding life, specifically about understanding the mechanisms through which the human body maintains, repairs, and renews itself, and about the very specific ways in which most people inadvertently interfere with those mechanisms every single day without knowing it. In America alone, over 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every single day. Millions of adults are watching their parents age and quietly wondering, is this what is coming for me? And millions more, in their 40s and 50s, are already beginning to feel the first intimations of a biological trajectory that nobody sat them down and explained. Nobody told you that the trajectory was modifiable. Nobody handed you the map. That is what this book is for. The question nobody asked. In 1900, the average American life expectancy at birth was 47 years. By 2000, it had climbed to 77. Most people attribute this increase entirely to advances in medicine, vaccines, antibiotics, surgical techniques, intensive care. And those advances certainly contributed, but a significant portion of the gain came from the dramatic reduction of early death from infectious disease, infant mortality, and occupational hazard. Now, in the 21st century, we face a different and more interesting question. Not merely how long can we survive, but how well, and for how long can we actually live? What does it mean to age well? And what determines whether your answer to that question is chosen or merely inherited? Longevity science is now answering these questions, and its answers are upending assumptions that most people, including most physicians, carry without examining them. The village that forgot to die. In 2004, a researcher named Dan Bietner partnered with National Geographic to investigate a puzzle that had been quietly baffling demographers for years. Why did certain small, geographically isolated communities produce extraordinary numbers of centenarians? Not just people who reached 100, but people who reached 100 while gardening their own food, walking uphill every morning, laughing with their grandchildren, and drinking homemade wine at lunch. He called these places blue zones: Sardinia in Italy, Okinawa in Japan, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Ikaria in Greece, and Loma Linda in California. These were not wealthy communities. They did not have access to cutting-edge medical technology. They were not consuming expensive supplements. They were living in ways that looked, from the outside, almost embarrassingly simple. But when Bettner and his team began to pull apart the fabric of their daily existence, what they ate, how they moved, who they talked to, what they believed, how they handled loss and failure and boredom, a pattern emerged that would become one of the most referenced findings in modern longevity science. These communities shared 9 common characteristics, which Bettner called the Power Nine. They moved naturally, not through gym memberships, but through a lifestyle in which physical movement was woven into every hour. They had purpose. They managed stress through ritual. They stopped eating when they were 80% full. They ate primarily plant-based diets. They belonged to faith communities. They kept families close. And they were embedded in social circles that reinforced healthy behavior. What was absent from this list was as striking as what was present. No mention of genetics. No mention of expensive interventions. No mention of willpower, discipline, or sacrifice. The number that changes everything. In 2006, a landmark twin study conducted across Sweden, Denmark, and Finland, involving more than 44,000 pairs of twins, delivered the scientific verdict on the genetics of aging debate with remarkable clarity. Genetics, the study found, accounts for roughly 20 to 30% of your lifespan. The rest, 70 to 80%, is shaped by the choices you make, the environments you inhabit, the relationships you build, and the internal narratives you carry. You are not the passive recipient of a biological verdict. You are the primary author of a biological story, and the pages are still being written. If you have been living as though your health is an inheritance you either received or didn't, as though your energy and vitality are simply products of genetic luck, that number is not just hopeful, it is revolutionary. 70 to 80% in your hands. What aging actually is, modern longevity science, driven by researchers like David Sinclair at Harvard, Walter Longo at USC, and Nobel laureate Elizabeth Blackburn at UCSF, has produced a radically different picture from the old model of mechanical decay. Aging, in this new framework, is not simply wear and tear. It is a biological program, a cascade of molecular events driven by specific, identifiable, and in many cases modifiable mechanisms. The most important of these mechanisms involve telomeres. Imagine your chromosomes as shoelaces. At the end of each shoelace is a small plastic cap that prevents the lace from fraying. Telomeres are those caps. Every time a cell divides, the telomere gets slightly shorter. When it becomes too short, the cell enters a state called senescence, a kind of cellular zombie mode where it doesn't die, but it leaks inflammatory signals and slowly poisons the tissue around it. Elizabeth Blackburn also identified the enzyme that maintains telomeres, telomerase. And what subsequent research has shown is that certain behaviors consistently activate telomerase, slowing the rate at which cells age. Those behaviors are not exotic. Aerobic exercise, stress reduction, quality sleep, strong social connections, a diet rich in specific micronutrients. The Sardinian shepherd walking uphill every morning is preserving his telomeres. The Okinawan grandmother eating her fermented vegetables is activating cellular repair mechanisms. They are not doing magic. They are, without knowing it, running the code. The fire beneath everything. There is a word that appears more frequently in modern longevity research than almost any other. Inflammation. Not the acute kind you experience when you cut your finger. That is essential and beneficial. The inflammation that destroys longevity is different. Chronic low-grade inflammation, which researchers have named inflammaging. Inflammaging is a slow, silent fire, burning at the cellular level. It accumulates invisibly over years and decades, steadily degrading every biological system it touches: cardiovascular, neurological, metabolic, immune. It is now understood to be a primary driver of virtually every major age-related disease: heart disease, type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, most cancers. And it is driven primarily by lifestyle. Sedentary behavior feeds it. Ultra-processed food accelerates it. Chronic psychological stress amplifies it. Social isolation fuels it. The behaviors that reduce it are precisely the behaviors observed in blue zone communities: movement, whole food, stress management, connection, purpose, rest. The promise of this book, what you are holding, is a map to a territory that already exists inside you: the biological capacity for renewal, repair, and sustained vitality that is written into every cell of your body and that most people never fully access because nobody showed them it was there. The longevity code has three primary layers: the biological, the psychological, and what we might call the relational spiritual, the layer of meaning, connection, and inner life that turns out, when the science is examined carefully, to be not an optional supplement to physical health, but one of its most powerful determinants. We are going to explore all three. We are going to meet the researchers who are rewriting what we thought we knew about human aging, the communities where longevity is a daily practice, and the individuals who discovered that the story of their health was not yet over. Because here is what every serious researcher in this field now agrees on: the human body is not simply counting down to a predetermined end. It is listening. It is responding. It is, at every moment, capable of more than you think. The code is real, and the first step to cracking it is understanding that it exists. The mind that builds the body. How your thoughts become your biology. Raphael didn't believe in miracles. He was a practical man, a civil engineer from Sao Paulo who had spent 4 decades building bridges, calculating loads, stress testing foundations. He believed in measurements, in data, in the verifiable logic of physical systems. When something broke, you found the structural failure, you fixed it, and you moved on. So when his doctor told him, at age 61, that his body was under a level of systemic stress, inconsistent with a healthy aging trajectory, Raphael did what engineers do. He looked for the source of the failure. He found it, eventually. But it wasn't where he expected. It wasn't in his diet, which was reasonable. It wasn't in his activity levels, which were adequate. The failure was in something far more fundamental, something that Raphael, the man who measured everything, had never thought to measure at all. It was in the story he was telling himself about who he was becoming. Every morning, for years, Raphael had been waking up and conducting a quiet internal inventory. Another day older, slower than I was at 50, joints stiffening, energy declining. This is just how it goes. He hadn't thought of these observations as dangerous. He thought of them as realistic. What he discovered was that they were none of those things. They were commands. The body that listens here is something that modern neuroscience has spent the last 30 years proving, and that every ancient wisdom tradition apparently already knew. Your body is always listening to your mind, not metaphorically, not poetically. Literally, biologically, at the level of hormones and neurotransmitters and cellular signaling cascades, your body is constantly receiving the broadcasts of your mental state and responding to them in real time. When you experience fear, your hypothalamus triggers a release of cortisol and adrenaline within seconds. Your immune function suppresses. Your cellular repair mechanisms throttle back to conserve energy for immediate survival. When you experience genuine gratitude, a different cascade begins. Oxytocin and endorphins enter circulation. The parasympathetic nervous system, your body's rest and repair mode, becomes dominant. Inflammatory markers decrease. Cellular regeneration accelerates. These are not fringe findings. They are among the most replicated results in psychoneuroimmunology, the field studying the intersection of mind, nervous system, and immune function. Your thoughts are not separate from your biology. Your thoughts are your biology, expressed in real time. What this means for aging. For most people in modern societies, aging is accompanied by a specific and largely unconscious mental program. It runs quietly in the background, so habitual and so culturally normalized that most people never identify it as a program at all. They simply experience it as reality. The program sounds something like this. After a certain age, decline is inevitable. Energy fades, memory weakens, the body becomes fragile. The best years are behind you. Now consider, if your body is constantly receiving and responding to the messages of your mind, what is this program producing in your cells? Every time you wake up and think, I'm getting older, I don't have the energy I used to, you are not simply observing your biology. You are instructing it. You are releasing hormonal signals that suppress regeneration and create the biological conditions for exactly the outcome you are describing. The late neuroscientist Candace Pert, who spent decades mapping the biochemistry of emotions, called this process molecules of emotion. Her research demonstrated that neuropeptides, tiny chemical messengers produced in response to emotional states, travel throughout the body and bind to receptors on cells everywhere, influencing genetic expression, immune function, and cellular behavior. What you think over time becomes what you are. The three ages. Nobody talks about, we live under the quiet tyranny of a single number, your chronological age. It has become the primary lens through which modern culture understands where we are in the trajectory of life. It is, in almost every meaningful biological sense, the least important of your three ages. The first age is chronological. It measures the number of years since your birth. It is accurate, consistent, and almost entirely irrelevant to your actual health and vitality. The second age is biological. It measures the actual functional state of your organs, your cells, and your physiological systems. It can differ from your chronological age by a decade or more in either direction, and it is directly modifiable through lifestyle, nutrition, and, crucially, the consistent mental environment you create for your body to operate within. The third age is the one least discussed and most powerful, your psychic age, the age you experience yourself to be. Research has consistently shown that people who experience themselves as younger than their chronological age have better health outcomes and lower mortality rates. A 2018 study published in JAMA Internal Medicine found that people who felt roughly 8 years younger than their actual age had a 41% lower risk of death over the study period. Tell the body you are old and it will age. Tell it with genuine feeling that you are vital and renewing, and it will pursue that directive with the same efficiency it brings to everything else. The subconscious. Your biology's operating system. There is a part of your mind that never sleeps, never doubts, and never argues. It does not evaluate the instructions it receives. It does not weigh evidence or consider alternatives. It simply executes, taking whatever it is consistently given and translating it with extraordinary precision into biological reality. This is your subconscious mind. The subconscious mind governs approximately 95% of your biological function. Your heart beats without conscious instruction. Your immune cells patrol without deliberate direction. All of this is orchestrated by a system of extraordinary sophistication operating beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. Think of it this way. Your conscious mind is the architect. It designs the building. Your subconscious mind is the construction crew, tireless, skilled, and completely committed to building exactly what the architect has drawn. It does not question the design. It builds what it is given. Most people have handed their subconscious a blueprint they never consciously chose. They inherited it from parents who aged in certain ways, from cultures that narrated aging in certain terms, from medical systems that presented certain outcomes as inevitable. None of it was ever evaluated for accuracy. All of it was quietly filed as fact. The work of intentional longevity is, at its most fundamental level, the work of revising that blueprint. Mei Lin's evening practice. Mei Lin, a 58-year-old architect in Singapore, had been experiencing what she described as a slow dimming, a progressive reduction in energy, clarity, and physical ease that she had accepted as simply what happened to women her age. A friend introduced her to a very simple practice. Each evening before sleep, in that particular window of semi-consciousness when the critical mind relaxes and the subconscious becomes unusually receptive, Mei Lin began to speak to herself differently, with genuine, emotionally grounded statements addressed to her own biology. Every system in my body knows how to renew itself. My cells carry the original design. Tonight, while I rest, that renewal is happening. Within 3 weeks, she was waking with less physical stiffness. Within 2 months, her energy had shifted noticeably upward. Within 6 months, several markers of inflammation had decreased significantly. Her doctor attributed it to positive lifestyle changes. Mei Lin smiled. She knew that the most fundamental change had happened in the nightly conversations she was now having with her own cells. Raphael, 18 months later. When Raphael's daughter visited him in Sao Paulo 18 months after his doctor's assessment, she told him something that surprised her. "You look different, younger. How is that possible?" He told her about the seminar in Buenos Aires where he had first encountered the psychophysiology research, about the notebook he had kept, about the nightly practice, a quiet, deliberate, emotionally sincere conversation with his own biology before sleep, about imagining his body not as something declining, but as something actively renewing, drawing on a source of vitality that had no expiration date. His daughter, a medical student, was skeptical, but she could not argue with what she saw. Her father, at 62, had more energy, better posture, clearer eyes, and faster movement than her father at 58. "The data is in the blueprint," he told her, with the precise satisfaction of an engineer whose calculation had proven correct. "Change the blueprint. Change the building. Speaking to your cells, sleep, visualization, and the biology of intentional renewal. There is a window that opens every night. Most people pass through it without knowing it exists. They fall asleep exhausted, carrying the unprocessed residue of the day, the frustrations, the anxieties, the low-grade dissatisfactions, and they wake up carrying most of it still, wondering why they feel heavier each year than the last. The window is the transitional state between wakefulness and sleep. Neuroscientists call it the hypnagogic state. What makes it remarkable, and in the context of longevity, perhaps the most important 15 minutes of your entire day, is what happens to the critical mind during this transition. It relaxes its grip. The analytical, evaluating, skeptical faculty that spends your waking hours gatekeeping your beliefs goes quiet, and in that quietude, the subconscious mind becomes extraordinarily receptive. Whatever you consistently place in this window goes in deep. It bypasses the guards and reaches the operating system directly. Every major wisdom tradition that developed practices around longevity understood this threshold intuitively. The Vedic practice of Yoga Nidra was designed specifically to access this state for physical and psychological renewal. What modern neuroscience has added is the mechanism, why it works, in the language of hormones and neural networks and cellular signaling, the architecture of sleep and renewal. Sleep is not rest. This is one of the most important revisions in our understanding of human biology over the past 2 decades. Sleep is a profoundly active biological process, during which cellular repair cascades run at full capacity, immune surveillance intensifies, memory consolidation occurs, hormonal systems reset, and inflammatory damage accumulated during waking hours is cleared. The hormone that most directly governs this process is human growth hormone, HGH. In adulthood, HGH is primarily the conductor of tissue repair, cellular regeneration, and metabolic restoration. It is released in large pulses during deep sleep, and its release is dramatically sensitive to the hormonal environment present at the moment of sleep onset. Here is the critical implication. The mental and emotional state you carry into sleep directly affects the quality of your body's overnight repair work. Cortisol suppresses HGH release. If you fall asleep in a state of chronic low-grade stress or rumination, your cortisol remains elevated, blunting the HGH pulse that would otherwise orchestrate the night's repair work. Conversely, falling asleep in a state of genuine relaxation and expectancy of renewal creates the optimal hormonal conditions for deep regenerative sleep. What you bring to the threshold of sleep is not merely a psychological choice. It is a biological instruction. Ivan's hands. Ivan was 76 years old and had not held a paintbrush in 19 years. He had been one of Prague's most celebrated watercolorists, known for luminous landscapes of the Bohemian countryside and a quality of light in his work that made his paintings immediately recognizable. Then arthritis had come for his hands, until the precision required for the fine work he loved had become impossible. A granddaughter visiting from Vienna left him a book about the relationship between mental imagery and physical outcomes in healing. He read it in 2 days, not because he believed it, but because he was bored and lonely, and it was interesting. What he found, sifted through his considerable skepticism, was a single idea he couldn't dismiss, that the body's inflammation response was profoundly modulated by the nervous system, and he had been, for 19 years, telling his hands they were broken. Every morning, when he woke and felt the stiffness, every time he looked at his swollen knuckles, he had been, without knowing it, sending his joints a very consistent message. You are damaged, irreparable, permanent. He decided to try something different. Each night before sleep, he held his hands gently and spoke to them with the quiet authority of a craftsman addressing a tool he respected. You know how to be supple. You have done this work for 50 years. The intelligence in you remembers flexibility. Tonight, while I sleep, that memory is restoring itself. He imagined the inflammation slowly clearing, replaced by space and fluid ease. He did this every night for 11 weeks. In the 12th week, he picked up a brush. By the end of the year, he had completed 23 paintings. A gallery in Prague gave him a small exhibition. The Renewal Protocol, a nightly practice. What Ivan developed intuitively, research now supports systematically. Here is a structured version of the threshold practice, drawn from neuroscience, psychophysiology, and contemplative traditions. Step 1. Physiological release, 2 to 3 minutes. Before any imagery or intention setting, your nervous system needs to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance. Lie in a comfortable position, breathe in for 4 counts, hold briefly, exhale for 6 to 8 counts. The extended exhale directly activates the vagus nerve, the primary pathway of parasympathetic activation. Do this 5 to 7 times. Step 2, body scanning with gratitude, 3 to 4 minutes. Move your awareness slowly through your body with the warmth of attention you would give something you genuinely appreciate. Your heart, which has beaten without interruption since before you were born. Your lungs, faithfully exchanging gases thousands of times each day. Research consistently shows that genuine felt gratitude produces measurable parasympathetic activation and anti-inflammatory hormonal shifts. Step 3, the renewal image, 4 to 5 minutes. Offer your subconscious an image of renewal, specific, sensory, emotionally warm. Your body surrounded by golden light that enters every cell and activates regeneration, or simply the felt sense of trust in your body's capacity to heal and renew. The specific content matters less than the emotional quality. Step 4, the verbal anchor, 1 to 2 minutes. As you begin to drift towards sleep, repeat quietly, "Tonight, my body is renewing itself completely. Every system is restoring. I am waking up younger than I fell asleep." Say these words with calm conviction, as you would say something you simply know to be true. Then release them and sleep. Visualization, the invisible scalpel. Dr. Gian Achterberg, who spent decades studying imagery and immune function at the University of Texas Health Science Center, conducted a landmark study training subjects to visualize specific immune cells and measuring whether the imagery produced measurable changes in those cell populations. The results were striking. Subjects who trained in specific imagery of their target cell types showed significant changes in exactly those cell counts. The body does not merely respond to imagery in general, it responds to specific imagery with corresponding specific biological changes. This is the invisible scalpel. By directing clear, consistent, emotionally warm imagery toward a specific area of the body, you create a sustained neurological signal that modulates the physiological response in that specific tissue. If you direct consistent imagery toward your cardiovascular system, seeing your heart strong, your arteries clear, your circulation free and vital, you are not engaging in wishful thinking. You are conducting a biological conversation in the language of image and feeling with the autonomic systems that govern that tissue's function. Dr. Amara's morning practice. Dr. Amara had spent 38 years as a professor of literature at the University of Nairobi. When she retired at 68, she fell within 6 months into a slow decline that frightened her in its speed and completeness. A former student who had gone into psychophysiology research sent her a paper on the relationship between purpose, cellular senescence, and biological aging. The core finding was stark. Cells in bodies of people with strong ongoing purpose show measurably lower rates of cellular senescence and higher telomere maintenance activity than those in bodies of people who have signaled to their biology that the active chapter is over. Retirement, in biological terms, can read as an instruction to begin shutting down. Dr. Amara began writing the book she had been putting off for 20 years, a study of how African oral storytelling traditions had been undervalued by Western literary criticism. She began each morning with 5 minutes of stillness, holding the image of her mind as a vast, clear library, fully functioning, adding new volumes. She said quietly, "My mind is sharp. My body is here to serve what I still have to do. We are not finished." Within 4 months, her energy had returned. Within a year, she had completed the first draft. Her doctor noted that her inflammatory markers had improved substantially. "What have you been doing differently?" he asked. "Working," she said, "and believing that it matters." The morning window. The first minutes after waking represent the subconscious mind's greatest morning openness. The brain moves from sleep through a state similar to the hypnagogic threshold before fully engaging analytical faculties. During this window, which typically lasts 5 to 15 minutes, the subconscious remains unusually accessible. Most people immediately fill this window with their phones or the background anxiety of anticipated obligations. The biological effect is to begin the day in mild sympathetic activation, a state that, sustained chronically, drives inflammaging and suppresses regenerative processes. The alternative is straightforward. Before you reach for your phone, before the day's agenda assembles itself in your mind, take 5 minutes to offer your biology a direction, not a demand, not a desperate wish, a calm, emotionally warm, genuinely felt sense of how your day is going to proceed. Today, my body is renewing, my energy is available, my mind is clear. I am moving toward something that matters. What you plant in the morning window grows through every hour that follows. The invisible fuel connection, purpose, and the biology of belonging. In 1938, a group of researchers at Harvard University began one of the most ambitious scientific studies ever conducted on human health and happiness. They recruited 268 male Harvard sophomores and began tracking their lives in extraordinary detail: physical health, mental health, relationships, careers, habits, losses, recoveries. The study was designed to run for a few decades. It ran, and continues to run, for over 80 years. It is now the longest study of adult life ever conducted. The question the researchers most wanted to answer was deceptively simple. What keeps people healthy and happy as they age? They measured almost everything science could measure: cholesterol, exercise, sleep, IQ, socioeconomic status, alcohol consumption. And after 80 years, the answer they found was not what most people expected. It was not diet, it was not exercise, though both mattered. It was not genetics, it was not wealth or education or professional achievement. The single most powerful predictor of long life, cognitive sharpness in old age, and sustained physical health was the quality of a person's close relationships. Good relationships keep us healthier and happier. Period. Robert Waldinger, Harvard Study of Adult Development. The biology of belonging. Loneliness is not merely an unpleasant feeling. It is a physiological state with measurable effects on virtually every biological system relevant to aging. John Cacioppo, a neuroscientist at the University of Chicago, found that chronically lonely people show elevated evening cortisol levels, disrupted sleep architecture, increased inflammatory markers, and accelerated cellular aging as measured by telomere length. The evolutionary logic is clear. For the vast majority of human history, separation from the group meant death. The social bond was not a luxury of emotional life. It was a survival mechanism of the first order. The nervous system evolved to treat social disconnection as a threat signal, triggering the same physiological stress response as physical danger, because in the ancestral environment, disconnection was danger. That ancient alarm is still wired into every human body. When you are genuinely connected, when you feel seen, valued, and safe with other people, your parasympathetic nervous system engages. Oxytocin flows. Inflammatory markers decrease. Telomere-maintaining enzymes become more active. You sleep better. You regenerate more completely overnight. Connection is not a supplement to the longevity protocol. For many people, it is the protocol. Purpose, the biological necessity nobody prescribes. In Okinawa, Japan, one of the original blue zones, there is a concept that has no precise equivalent in English: ikigai. Often translated as the reason to get up in the morning, it is experienced less as an intellectual concept and more as a felt quality of aliveness. A sense that your presence here, today, in this particular life, is in some way necessary. Research on ikigai and longevity is now extensive and consistent. A 2008 study following over 43,000 Japanese adults found that those who reported a strong sense of ikigai had significantly lower mortality rates across all major causes of death, including cardiovascular disease and cancer. The effect size was comparable to that of regular exercise. Purpose, in biological terms, is not motivational decoration. It is a physiological force. A strong sense of purpose suppresses the chronic activation of the stress response. It generates what psychologists call approach motivation, a forward-oriented neurological state that is, at the cellular level, directly opposite to the contraction associated with despair and the biological state of preparing to die. Cells in bodies oriented toward something, bodies that the nervous system is treating as vehicles still needed for important ongoing work, maintain themselves differently from cells in bodies the nervous system has begun to categorize as finished. Nadia at 73. Nadia had been a civil rights lawyer in Johannesburg for 40 years. She had argued cases that changed policy. She had mentored a generation of younger lawyers. When she retired at 70, there were speeches, tears, and genuine love in that room. And then she went home. Within 18 months, Nadia had aged visibly and measurably, faster than she had in the previous decade. Her blood pressure was elevated. Her inflammatory markers had risen. She was sleeping poorly. "I feel," she told a friend, "like a building that has been evacuated. The structure is still standing. But nothing is happening inside anymore." The friend, who had worked in palliative care and recognized what was happening, said something direct. "Nadia, your body thinks you're done. You need to give it a reason to disagree." Nadia found a young legal aid organization in her neighborhood that was overwhelmed and understaffed. She offered to consult 2 days a week at no charge. The effect was almost immediate. Not because the work was physically demanding, but because her nervous system received again the signal it had been missing. You are still needed. There is work that requires exactly what you have. Within 3 months, her sleep had improved. Within 6, her inflammatory markers had returned to baseline. "I stopped being retired," she told her doctor. The physiology of forgiveness. There is a weight that many people carry into old age without recognizing how much biological vitality it is consuming. Not the weight of physical illness, the weight of unresolved anger, of accumulated grievance, of the corrosive, ongoing energy expenditure of not forgiving. The research on forgiveness and health is among the most consistently replicated findings in psychophysiology. Genuine forgiveness, not performed forgiveness, but the actual internal release of the sustained hostile emotional state, produces measurable biological change. Blood pressure decreases, heart rate variability improves, inflammatory markers fall, immune function strengthens, sleep quality rises. The mechanism is not mysterious. Sustained unforgiveness is, at the biological level, sustained stress. It is the chronic activation of the threat response against a danger that is no longer physically present, but is kept alive by the repeated rehearsal of injury and anger. Every time the grievance is mentally revisited, the stress hormones that accompanied the original event are re-released. The body cannot distinguish between the memory of a wound and a current wound. It responds to both with the same biochemical alarm. People who carry decades of unforgiveness are, in the most literal sense, repeatedly rewounding themselves. Fatima's release. Fatima was 54 years old and had lived, for most of her adult life, in a state of unresolved anger toward her father. She had done years of therapy. She understood, intellectually, what had happened and why. But the anger was still there. A persistent tightness in her chest, a tension in her shoulders that lived just beneath the surface of her daily calm. The practice she developed was not dramatic. It did not require reconciliation. Her father had died years earlier. It required only this: the daily, deliberate, emotionally genuine act of releasing the ongoing biological war. Each evening she sat quietly and said, "I release the anger I have been holding, not because it was not justified, but because I am no longer willing to let it live in my body. I am giving myself back to myself." Over weeks and months, the physical symptoms began to ease. Her sleep deepened, her energy stabilized. A persistent digestive problem that multiple doctors had investigated and found no clear cause for gradually resolved. She did not become a different person. She became a less burdened version of the same person, and her body, finally relieved of the sustained stress of the internal war she had been fighting for 3 decades, began to repair. Inner peace, as biological state. Peace is not merely a pleasant emotional condition. It is a specific physiological state with specific biological characteristics. When the nervous system is in a state of genuine peace, not suppressed conflict, not performed calm, but actual inner quiet, the parasympathetic branch dominates. Cortisol clears. Inflammation decreases. The heart rate variability signature associated with optimal autonomic function becomes measurable. Cellular repair runs more efficiently. The genes associated with longevity are more actively expressed. Peace is, in the most literal biological sense, the environment in which youth is maintained. The clearing practice is simple. Each evening, before your renewal practice at the threshold of sleep, take 5 minutes to ask, "What am I carrying today that is not mine to keep?" Identify it, name it, and then, as genuinely as you can manage, release it, simply, "For tonight." I am putting this down outside the door of sleep. I am giving my cells tonight to do their work without fighting this additional war. The body always knows what to do with peace. It has been waiting, in many cases, for years to receive some. The living code. Putting it all together and beginning. There is a moment that appears, in one form or another, in the stories of nearly everyone who has genuinely cracked the longevity code. It is not the moment they discovered the right diet or the optimal sleep protocol or the most effective stress reduction technique, though all of those play a role. It is something quieter and more fundamental than any of those things. It is the moment they changed their fundamental relationship with the question, "What is actually possible for me?" For Marcus in Zurich, reviewing his blood work in a hospital corridor, it was the moment his doctor told him his biological age was 14 years ahead of his chronological one. And instead of receiving this as a sentence, he received it as information. Actionable information about a system that could be influenced. For Raphael in Sao Paulo, it was the moment a researcher's data made him realize that the engineering problem wasn't in the structure, it was in the blueprint, and blueprints can be revised. For Ivan in Prague, it was the moment he decided, tentatively, skeptically, with nothing to lose, to stop telling his hands they were broken. For Nadia in Johannesburg, it was the moment her friend told her, with the directness of someone who had sat with dying people and knew what the beginning of dying looked like, "Your body thinks you're done." In each case, the transformation that followed was not miraculous, it was not instantaneous. It was the result of consistent, daily, intentional engagement with the biological systems we have described throughout this book. But it began, always, with a change in the foundational belief about what was possible. That change is available to you. It is, in fact, the only place this can begin. The code assembled. The longevity code is not a single key. It is a combination, a layered system of biological, psychological, and relational factors that interact, reinforce each other, and compound over time. Understanding this system is important, but what matters most is not understanding it. What matters most is living it. At the biological layer, the foundational truth is that your body is a self-renewing system that has been doing its extraordinary work since before you were born, and that the primary threats to its continued effectiveness are not the passage of time per se, but the accumulation of chronic low-grade inflammation, telomere shortening driven by sustained psychological stress, disrupted sleep that prevents the overnight repair cascades from running fully, and the metabolic dysregulation produced by sedentary behavior and processed food. Each of these threats is modifiable. None of them are fixed by genetics alone. At the psychological layer, the foundational truth is that your thoughts are not separate from your biology. They are your biology, expressed in real time. The chronic program of self-narrated decline, the quiet daily inventory of what is fading, stiffening, slowing, is not a neutral observation of physical reality. It is a biological instruction delivered to 37 trillion cells that are waiting, at every moment, for exactly that kind of directional signal. The revision of that program from one oriented toward inevitable decline to one oriented toward ongoing renewal is not denial. It is accurate biology. The renewal capacity is real. The body's ability to respond to clear, consistent, emotionally grounded signals of expected vitality is documented and replicated across decades of research. You are not pretending when you tell your body it is capable of more. You are finally telling it the truth. At the relational and spiritual layer, the foundational truth is that human beings are not designed to age alone, in isolation, without purpose or connection. The evidence from the blue zones, from the Harvard study, from the psychoneuroimmunological research on loneliness and belonging is unambiguous. Genuine human connection is not an emotional luxury. It is a biological requirement for sustained health. And the felt sense of purpose, the ongoing conviction that your presence here matters, that there is still work requiring exactly what you have, is one of the most powerful anti-aging forces that science has identified. You are not the victim of your biology. You are its author, and the most important chapter has not yet been written. The daily architecture. Knowing the code is one thing. Building it into the structure of daily life is another. Here is a practical architecture. Not a rigid prescription, but a framework for making the code a lived reality rather than an intellectual concept. The morning window, first 5 to 10 minutes upon waking. Before reaching for your phone, spend 5 to 10 minutes in the hypnopompic state offering your biology a direction. Hold the felt sense of renewal, vitality, and forward orientation. Say, quietly and with genuine feeling, "Today my body is renewing. My mind is clear. I am moving towards something that matters." Allow this to settle before the noise of the day begins. Physical movement, daily, not optional. The research on movement and telomere maintenance, inflammatory regulation, and neuroplasticity is unambiguous. Movement is cellular housekeeping. 30 to 45 minutes of moderate aerobic activity most days is sufficient to produce measurable anti-aging biological effects. Walk, swim, cycle. The specific modality matters far less than the consistency. Nutritional intelligence, most meals, not every meal. The anti-inflammatory dietary pattern that emerges from Blue Zone's research is not complicated. Primarily whole foods, primarily plant-based, minimal ultra-processed inputs, moderate caloric density. Eat mostly real food. Eat somewhat less than maximum fullness. Eat with other people when possible. Social investment, daily, not occasional. Connection is not a weekend activity. It is a daily biological requirement. Call someone, sit with someone. Allow yourself to be genuinely seen. The quality of your close relationships is, according to the longest-running study of adult life ever conducted, the single most powerful predictor of how well and how long you will live. Treat it accordingly. The threshold practice, nightly. The practice described in Part 3, physiological release, body scanning with gratitude, the renewal image, the verbal anchor, takes 15 to 20 minutes. Make it as non-negotiable as brushing your teeth, because what it is doing for your cells is considerably more important. Purpose tending, ongoing. If you currently have a strong felt sense of purpose, work that feels meaningful, relationships that feel necessary, a project that requires what only you can bring, protect it. If that sense has faded or gone dormant, finding it again is not a luxury. It is biological medicine. What is the thing that if you did not do it would simply not be done? Start there. The clearing practice, as needed, ideally daily. The 5-minute evening inventory of what you are carrying that is not yours to keep is cellular maintenance. Unprocessed anger, sustained grievance, and unresolved guilt create the same chronic stress response as any other persistent threat signal. Release what you can. The body will use that released energy for repair. What the oldest people know, the Japanese gardener documented in the original Blue Zones research worked his land until 103. When asked his secret, he spoke not of supplements or dietary protocols, but of a practice he had maintained every morning without interruption. He stood facing the sun as it rose and said quietly to himself and to his garden and to whatever he understood to be larger than himself, "Today we grow together." A woman in Nicoya, Costa Rica, who was still cooking, teaching, and dancing at 93, was asked what she attributed her longevity to. She thought for a moment and then said, "I have never thought about how old I am. I have only thought about how much love I still have to give today. These are not the answers that appear on longevity supplement bottles. They are not the answers that trend on health podcasts. But they are, in the light of everything this book has presented, the most scientifically accurate answers that could be given. The man who grew together with his garden each morning was maintaining, day after day, decade after decade, an orientation toward life as something ongoing, generative, and requiring his continued presence. His nervous system received this message every morning and responded by treating his body as a vehicle still needed for important work. The woman who measured her days in love still to be given had, without knowing the science, cracked the code completely. She had purpose. She had connection. She had rejected the cultural narrative that assigns a shelf life to human vitality, and her body, receiving these signals for 9 decades, had responded accordingly. The letter to your cells. There is a practice that some practitioners of intentional longevity have found useful, not as a daily ritual, but as a foundational act of orientation that can be returned to when the program feels abstract or remote. Write a letter to your body, not a letter cataloging its failures or its departures from an imagined ideal. A letter of acknowledgement, genuine, specific, emotionally warm recognition of what your body has done, is doing, and is capable of doing. Tell it that you know it has been working, without interruption, since before you can remember, that you know it healed the injuries you barely noticed and the ones that frightened you, that you know it carried you through the decades of experience that constitute your life, and that you are aware, finally, that you have not always spoken to it as the partner it has been. Tell it what you now understand, that it is not a machine running down, that it is a self-renewing system of extraordinary intelligence, that it is listening, that you are, from this point forward, going to give it better instructions. Tell it what you expect, not with the desperation of someone who believes they are running out of time, but with the calm authority of someone who has read the engineering specifications and knows that the system is more capable than it has been given credit for. Then seal the letter. Keep it somewhere. Return to it when you need to remember what you are doing and why. Because this is ultimately what the longevity code comes down to. Not a protocol, not a supplement stack, not a genetic lottery. A relationship between you and the extraordinary biological system you inhabit. Between the mind you have been given and the body it is shaping every moment of every day. Between the story you tell about what is possible and the biological reality that story, persistently told, becomes. A final word. Marcus went back to his doctor in Zurich 18 months after that first terrible appointment in the gray plastic chair. The tests were run. The numbers were compared. His biological age had dropped from 61 to 53. He had not found a miracle. He had not been genetically lucky. He had not stumbled upon some exotic intervention unavailable to ordinary people. He had learned the code. And he had run it, imperfectly, inconsistently, with all the ordinary human difficulties that accompany any serious attempt at change, but persistently, enough that his cells had responded, his body had listened. Your body is listening too. The only question that matters, now that you know what the code contains and how it works, is this: what are you going to say to it?